All right, so I'm going to talk about mobile development with Cordova. As Randy said, I'm kind of a native. I grew up here, I went to school at Georgia Tech, but then I left this place for New York City and have been doing most of my JavaScript there. Most of my talks are kind of all over the place. Like I'll jump in and out of terminal, examples on and off GitHub, things like that. So if you want me to slow down at any point, if you want me to revisit a slide, the slides have 1 or 2 words at most, just holler, raise your hand, I don't care. It's meant to be pretty interactive. I don't want to just be professory up here to preach to you, okay? So, I am known on Twitter as @defunctzombie. That's the best way you can reach me if you want to complain about this talk or if you want to ask me questions later. That's my GitHub where you can find all sorts of JavaScript that I'm going to talk about. And I founded this company called Cordoba, which does scheduling for university students. So, what is Apache Cordova? As it says from the Cordova website, brutally stolen onto my slide right here, it is a platform for building native mobile applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And so this is awesome because it lets you leverage all the same technologies you already know. Hopefully, if you're at the JavaScript Meetup. If you are new to JavaScript, welcome. JavaScript will welcome you with open arms, and I believe CoffeeScript will as well. And you can use all those things to build mobile applications really quickly and get your kind of thoughts out there and try them and prototype them and actually take an app from the prototype all the way to deploy to App Store stage, while staying in this JavaScript, HTML, CSS land that you're comfortable with. And the big advantage there is that you can build an app for iOS, that's iPhones, iPads, and for Android, and for Firefox, and BlackBerry, and Windows Mobile, and you can more or less use the same code base to do this, right? And I say more or less because we'll get into that, or you'll get into it, I'll cover it very loosely. But that's really cool. And as I discovered using Cordova and building an app with it, it actually lets you work much, much quicker to build a mobile app than you'd be able to do using the native Java or the Objective-C ways, if you're familiar with mobile development. With Cordova, there are 2 major workflows that you'll discover. The Cordova documentation on cordova.io, that's their website, links to the docs, is really amazing, actually. That's the starting place. And a lot of this kind of is just simplified versions of that, right? So the 2 main workflows are web project development and native platform development. The biggest difference is kind of at what level you care about the underlying operating system stuff. Web project development is really just like building a mobile-ready web app in a lot of ways, except you don't have to care about the responsive aspects because you're just targeting small devices, right? Phones or tablets. So you don't have to put a lot of those media queries, things like that, and you do things specifically knowing that you're on a touch device, so you don't have hovering, you don't have some of those other things, okay? Native platform development, you get a lot kind of lower level, you control some of the project settings, tweak things a little better, but really, you can stay away from that when you're just getting started. I definitely recommend the web project development workflow. That's the one we're going to focus on. That's the one that will get you up and running the quickest. This talk is just going to be kind of blazing fire to get you up and running with the Cordova project. And it will probably make little sense if you don't know some of the concepts that I'm going to talk about in advanced JavaScript. But hopefully it'll give you enough teaser elements to go look at stuff on your own later. So to get started with Cordova, all you need are these 2 commands, right? So you npm install gcordova, and don't worry, this will not infect your computer if you hate Node or hate npm or something like that. I don't know why. This will just give you the Cordova, command line tool that you can use. And you just run this command in a terminal, and it will create a directory and a basic Cordova project for you. Right here, hopefully those at the back can see, is a sample command I would have run to start the CourseOff project. And it is actually the command I ran to start my CourseOff mobile project. So if we do that, oh goodness, I have to find the terminal. Nope, you guys can't see that. Yeah, cool, we can see that. Okay, so if we run, what is it? What does the slide say? Cordova create, hello, come, and okay, right? So this is pretty easy, self-explanatory. You can read the Cordova docs about what this does, but we're going to run this, and bam, it did its thing, and if we change to the hello directory, we see we have some crap in here. It's automatically made for us, right? And this is a basic Cordova application. If we go to the next slide, it says how we start adding support for platforms. So a basic Cordova application doesn't target any devices out of the box, right? It's just bootstrapped, some boilerplate nonsense we don't really care about Cordova needs. Next thing we have to run is this command, which says we are going to build for iOS devices. There's a similar command for Android, for Firefox, for BlackBerry, and for Windows in case you, for some reason, develop on Windows. No one does. So we run Cordova. Oh goodness. And it says, oh bam, amazing. It's so wonderful. The great thing about command line tools versus like GUI tools is you can make scripts and all these things to do them really quickly. So preparing iOS project, it's done. We don't have to do anything else. Next slide. This is very fast, I told you. We have these two commands called Cordova Emulate and Cordova Run. What they do is basically let you run this application that was bootstrapped for us and see it working, whether it's in an iOS emulator or the Android emulator environment. If you're going to do mobile development, I suggest you get a Mac. This is not a pitch to get you to buy a Mac laptop. There's a reason for this. If you're going to target iOS devices, you will have to have a Mac to build using Xcode and all of those tools available. A Mac will also let you build for Android devices, Firefox OS devices, and I'm sure there's some way to get the Windows tools kit to run on a Mac, but no one builds for Windows anyways. So if we go back to our command line and we type Cordova Emulate, you can see it says some stuff, and it says it's emulating our platform iOS, because that's the only one. We should have actually typed emulate iOS. Hopefully this is going to work. Maybe, I don't know. If it doesn't, we'll just press on, but come on. Need you to be strong here. Do your thing. Oh yeah, look at that. I got to zoom out because projector. But that is our Cordova app. This is actually running the iPhone simulator. If we were on my screen with more Retina, we'd actually see the pretty little iPhone, iPhone bezel screen around it. But this is the Cordova app that was. Hello. This is the Cordova app that was bootstrapped for us by default with all the just like junk code they threw in there, and we see it running in the emulator. Right? If I brought my iPhone that I test with or my Android device, I'd plug it up to my computer, and I could actually type Cordova Run, and it will ship the package to my phone, and I can play with it on my phone. Right? So it's very easy. It's just these commands you can do, and you can test on your devices as well as your computer. If you're doing Android development, I suggest you look into a thing called Genymotion for your emulator. It is much better than the stock Android emulator, which is a piece of shit and unusable. So that's those two commands. So we have a running app, right? We ran like 4 commands and we have a running app from somewhere, but I promise you this was made with HTML and JavaScript, and we're going to be able to edit it as such, right? So we're going to go ahead and go back to our slides here. Come on in, please. All right, so all of the stuff, if you want to follow along for the home game, is on this repo, github.com, because you can figure out GitHub is .com. Corsair Cordova Bootstrap, right? If you get the very first commit to that repo, it's the initial project, as it is when I ran that Cordova create. I checked that in, that's the initial commit. Everything else I'm going to talk about from this point on is commits that I tried to make more or less logically onto that repo so you could follow along. Okay? That's my time. So if we look at the project, there is some folders in here. The main, oh goodness, I don't want to cover them up. So I like to walk around when I talk. Config.xml is your project settings, right? If we take a look at that, there's not too many exciting things in here, actually. I'll just do that so we can actually see color stuff. It basically says the name, the email, some stuff, access content, any of this crap. It doesn't really matter. You can, again, read the Cordova docs if you want. To configure things like whether your app is portrait or landscape, or whether it's full screen or part screen, things like that, and some other configuration options, you'll throw them into config.xml. And depending on your platforms, this will get merged with other files. Again, all of this is documented on the Cordova website. I'm just putting it out there so you're aware that this file is kind of like your app configuration location. All right, www folder. Now we get into the interesting part. So what is a Cordova application, really? The thing we saw. A Cordova application is simply something that opens a web view on the simulator or your mobile phone and loads up files in the www folder, right? That's it. It doesn't actually make a web server either. It's an important distinction. It just opens the web view and opens the local files that live on the device somewhere. You won't actually know where because of randomization and stuff like that. Opens the files in that directory. That's it. From there on out, you're accessing a web view that's giving you access to like native APIs through bridges that Cordova provides and plugins. And we'll talk about how to leverage some of those. But that's fundamentally all it is. And the final thing before we start to get into some code is the platforms directory. Yep. If we look at the platforms directory, for those, all we have is iOS, right? So each platform you make will have a directory in the platform folder. You will not check this in when using the web workflow because this is like the build files, the intermediate files, things like that. They're specific to that platform. What Cordova build and those emulate commands fundamentally do is they copy things from your www directory into special magical locations inside of each platform directory that those get bundled up and made into your packages, your IPAs, whatever you need for your various platforms, right? So that's how it works. You still have to know that this is happening to understand kind of the entire workflow and possibly debug issues, but you typically won't touch platforms internally when you're working with the web workflow. And as I noted here, it's great. You know, you drop it into your git ignore, you don't make external commits to it. So, and the kind of final pro tip is to do this command, npm install CoreSoft Ripple Emulator. Ripple Emulator is an awesome project, it's another Apache project, which lets you run an emulator for Cordova in the browser. So that same Cordova app I emulated in the iOS emulator, you can actually run an emulator in the browser, and I'll show you what it looks like. So if I go to my command line, oh goodness, you guys can't see that. So this is that repo I talked about, and it's just got some code in it and other things, but if I run Ripple Emulate in here, it's, you know, started a web server, gave me a URL. If I go to my web browser and I open that URL, this is what it looks like, right? It gives us a very pretty bevel, so it's clear that we're developing for a mobile device, you know, because otherwise we wouldn't know. And it bridges all that Cordova stuff for us. So when we open it up, we see the same thing we saw in that iOS simulator, but it did all of that for us. The awesome thing here is that you see I have developer tools open. You can inspect all your elements. You can play around with your JS. You can modify your CSS styles. All of this stuff you can do for your mobile app right here. You know, and this makes the mobile development process way easier, as I heard you just whisper, because it is a pain in the ass to do this when you do the native route, right? It's very, very difficult. The other really cool thing, because it is a mobile app, I'll actually show you while I've got Simulator open, is, again, why you buy Mac products. Chrome actually does this for Android, is you go to develop an iPhone simulator, and we can actually inspect inside of the simulator too. If I click inspect, click an element, it will drop into inspecting inside of the simulator, which is really nice for debugging. Chrome for Android devices has something called Chrome Remote Debugging as well. It's like an extension you install. It does the same thing. It's fantastic. Works great. So that's a real big advantage for writing these apps using like the same web technologies. You can leverage all the same tools you're already familiar with. And where are my slides? Awesome. That's why it's a pro tip. This is a lifesaver. This will make your mobile development process just speed along so much quicker. Because you'll just do in-browser development, and then when you're ready, you'll run in the simulators and the devices and test flight. I'll talk about all that. So, let's talk about divorce. It's a painful topic, but it's important to understand that the default files that Cordova dumped into your www folder is just an example to start with. It's actually not a great way to start building a full-fledged mobile app. they kind of dump the JavaScript in one file, very simple minimal example, and the CSS also gets dumped into one file. For those of you that are hopefully doing complex app development for mobile and desktop sites, you know that one file solutions are just not going to scale, right? You're going to have to start bringing in external code, all these things. So there are ways to do that, obviously, with Cordova. Again, because it's all very flexible, your assets just need to end up in that www folder. Is everyone following along? More or less, maybe. Yeah, it's going really fast. It all makes sense once you look at the code, I promise. The code is wonderful and magical. So what I like to do is, instead of putting everything automatically into that www folder, which I'll show you right here. So you see we've got www over there. Instead of putting things in there, I make top-level JS and CSS folders, okay? And in those folders, I start putting the code for my app, right? In CSS, I'm going to show you my examples. I'm using something called Stylus. You can use Sass, you can use whatever other frameworks you like. With JavaScript, I'm going to show you a very simple way using Browserify to leverage multiple files, as well as external modules to build up projects very quickly. So, So let's look at the basic app for, I'm going to check out the clean clone, which is what you get by default when you just do that Cordova create, right? So let's see, where's that initial command? Okay, so this is what it looks like when you just get that, you run that Cordova create command, and it gives you a www directory. In here, you get your CSS folders, your JS folders, with an index.html file. Index.html, if I open this, oh god, it has this stupid. Right, so this is the file that actually gets opened when you open your Cordova web view. And for those of you that have done any sort of web development, it looks like an HTML file. Surprise, surprise. It does what you would expect. It brings in style sheets right here. It brings in index CSS up there, and Cordova JS and JS index. Okay, so it does all that, loads up the JS files. And right here it calls something called app.initialize. Okay? And we'll see where that app.initialize is. If we look at our JS, this is all provided with that create command by default, actually. So this is the JavaScript file that we get. Should I make the font smaller? I don't know. People in the back will have a hard time. Again, this command, this file, just provides some boilerplate examples. The most important thing to get from this file is this device ready command, this add event listener device ready. Before you do anything with, when I say do anything like reading contacts from the device or setting up any access to plugins or things like that, you need to wait for the device ready. You can actually start rendering onto the DOM and setting up the initial import before device ready, but device ready is important before you know that everything has loaded. It's not quite the same as a DOM loaded event, which is totally useless in modern web development, because if you put your JavaScript at the end of the page, all the DOM elements have already loaded. Our JavaScript is still at the end of the page. We still need to wait for this event. This is an important thing to remember when you're doing this. And there are other events, as it says here, like load, offline, and online, so you know if the device is on online and offline. All right, how am I doing on time? Who's keeping track of time? Good. How many more minutes do I have to blast through this?
Check with Brian.
How much more time would you like? Left. Oh, used? Yeah. All right, fantastic. 10 more minutes, I'll try. This is going fast, this is a lot of stuff. That's why the repo, you're just gonna have to visit on your own and ask me questions afterwards. But the project is set up so that you can clone that repo and start playing around very easily. A lot of the legwork and gotchas have been fixed for you in the things I've done. So that was the default file. So now let's go back to the repo as it exists now, right? If we look at the repo in its current state, it's going to be very different than that file. And this is because I've organized in a way that makes it kind of easier to have multiple contributors to your mobile app, as well as organize your views and your code in multiple files instead of kind of dumping everything into a global namespace. So let's look at what that looks like. In the www folder, there are still index CSS and index.js, but they're not committed to the repo. You'll see that those are, I guess I should probably, there we go. Those files are ignored by getIgnore because they're build artifacts, and I'll show you where that happens. But index.html is still kind of the same, with the exception that I just, removed that app initialize nonsense. So all this app is going to do is load our index.js file, which gets built, right? And I'll show you where that's built from, okay? So now when you want to edit your app, you don't really have to mess with index.html much. You just do everything in your JavaScript and CSS files. If we look at the JavaScript, in the top level directory, this is important, we see that there are some folders and things. I, by convention, like to have my kind of project entry point, my main point, called index.js. This is pretty common when you work with a lot of Node.js modules and other modules that are kind of written in this common JS style, so that you know, looking at this folder, what's the important file that I should start with? Well, it's index.js, right? Just like index.html. If we look at this, we see that I've got some things going on here that start to look kind of not like regular JavaScript that you might be familiar with. But if you write Node.js modules, you would be familiar with this. At the top, I've got require fast click. You're going to want this if you're making a mobile app. What this does is it fixes that annoying, stupid 300 millisecond delay on touch events on mobile devices. If you don't know about this delay, you should read about it. But fundamentally what happens is on a mobile web view, when you click a link or a button, there's about a 300 millisecond delay before the browser actually registers that, which causes people to perceive that lag that gets associated with HTML5 mobile apps are laggy. Most of that is this clicking perception. So if you just require fast click, it'll go away, right? Debug is a module that used to print debug information during development, okay? And require loading view is something I wrote. It is that loading view in a self-contained class, if you will, right? So instead of having that code kind of exist on the HTML, index.html page, and some of it in the app.js or whatever, I've contained it to essentially a view class, if you will, and instantiate it here. And again, on device ready, we just debug devices ready, then we do view.ready. Right, that's it. This is our index.html file. If we look at loading view, loading view, again, has two files in it, index.html and index.js. And if we look at index.js, we see that it follows, again, a very similar pattern. We require some libraries that we want to use, okay? In this case, we also make a class-like prototype thing in JavaScript. If you're not familiar with this pattern, I suggest you look into this pattern of making class objects in JavaScript. It essentially is you define a function, which is your class name, and then whenever you want to make methods, you do that function .prototype.the method name, and you define the function. Right? This is, again, very common if you write a lot of Node.js modules, and common if you write kind of, I'm going to not say the words, if you write kind of class and object-oriented JavaScript. I hate to say that. Okay? But what this does is it contains everything for rendering our view inside of this file. And we would have views like, for example, on the CourseOff app, I have login views, I have agenda views, I have schedule views. They're all in these self-contained folders. And the other thing, notice I haven't mentioned the word Browserify once yet. But it comes into play putting all these pieces together, and I'll show you that as kind of the last thing to wrap this up, is this required HTML file. This is a small trick I really like to do to bring in my templates for this view. So I actually write the template for this view alongside in that same folder. If we look at the loading view, there's two files in there. for this view, I actually write the HTML alongside that, and that require statement, there's a feature of the packager that I use to build all this up into one JavaScript file that allows me to require that HTML file, and it just works, right? It gives me a string, and I can use it, I can insert it into the DOM, I can do fancier things with it, okay? So this is very nice. You can write your template files like this and just bring the scripts in if you're like other templating languages, either Mustache or React or Reactive or the hundreds of them that there are. You can also, sorry, I'm going to get sidetracked here. The thing that makes this all work is a nice little makefile that I have provided for you. Now, if you are part of the JavaScript fan base of hot new build tool of the week, you can use Gulp, Grunt, Bower, Tool. I don't know what the hot new thing is. I know how makefiles work. Makefiles are simple. I use makefiles. Okay? If you want and are familiar with your other workflow, you can absolutely use those instead. The important thing is that we're just going to skip some of these things. Like I said, a lot of this stuff, if you go through all the commits, I described them in a little more detail and the README talks about it. It's oriented to all the way from basic app to something you can actually put on an app store. So I have makefile targets that do the full release process in here. The build right here, this command, we call Browserify, and we give it the input, JS, index.js, and we output to www.index.js. This is that magic I talked about where we're going to take Browserify, which is a bundler. It's going to look at all those require statements that I wrote, which is not typical, language JavaScript. It looks at those, finds the files on the disk that, satisfy the requirements, puts them all into one file, and it's going to spit that out in index.js in the www folder, right? This is very nice because my app I can write using separate files, organized folder structure, no globals, because everything can easily be identified by just looking at the top of the file, what have I required, just like you would write maybe a Ruby or Python app with import statements, and have it all output into one final build script, which will just work in the browser. The debug flag, some of you may be wondering, well, how am I going to debug this if it's all just this concatenated file, whatever? We have solved that problem because the debug flag gives you source maps. So when an error happens, you can trace it back to the original file on disk as well. Very nice. Index CSS I didn't go into, but I did a very similar thing, right? If we look at CSS index style, you'll see that I import normalize. I recommend starting with normalize as a base because it still will handle some maybe differences between the Android web view and the iOS web view and the Firefox web view because browser vendors hate developers. And then these are a few things cherry-picked from the Cordova project, right? Because when you tap on things in the web view, you don't want certain highlighting, whatever. And then I import app, which is, again, some other style sheets specific to my application and so on and so forth. And again, I organize my style sheets kind of in a folder structure similar to my views so that I know and keep them kind of organized accordingly. And all of that is tied together with the makefile so that when I type make assets, nothing to be done for assets, but I'll just do make clean assets. I think I did make clean assets. I'll just remove them to show you. So those two are not committed, right? In the repo, if we look, there's nothing wrong with the repo because they're ignored in the get ignore file, right? As we see at the bottom down there, not lying, right? I speak the truth. If we run that, we see it compiled, right? It just built those two assets into the www folder. If we look at them, we can look at them if we're interested in seeing what they look like. They're just built CSS files and JavaScript files. For the most part, you can actually just read them. They're just concatenated, essentially concatenated versions of what we have. And how am I doing on time? How much more do I have to cover? Like I said, this is going to be moving fast. You're meant to explore on your own. Debug I talked about. Icons, splash screens I'm not going to talk about. There's good documentation on that. You can ping me afterwards. There's a few little gotchas with getting your icons and splash screens in the right places in the project, but I can walk you through all of that. Very simple. Beta and release. This is actually really useful, and I'll do a final mention of this. In the tools folder, I dropped 2 scripts which I made in the process of working on my mobile app. Get version doesn't matter, it's just a small little script returns the project version, but release is actually an interesting script and contains a lot of command line tools to do your final app release for Android and iOS, because those are 2 platforms that I targeted. And what this includes, for those of you that aren't aware of mobile development, before you're ready to ship to the App Store, you have to package your app in a certain way. You have to sign it with certain keys and certificates, and you have to provision it if you're going for the iOS App Store. And all of that can actually be done on the command line, because there are really cool tools for both Android and iOS development. So I actually made a script to do that very easily for both, so that when I'm ready to release an app, I bump the version number, I type do release, and the script runs and just packages the app into a directory tagged with that version number. And an indispensable tool that you're going to use when making mobile apps, not online, whatever. It's called testflightapp.com. What it will do is it will allow you to set up beta testers for your application so that you can push your package, your pre-release, to them to test before you actually push it to the app stores. It's absolutely critical that you get real testing on real devices and feedback from potential users before you even submit your app first time to the App Store, right? And TestFlight is wonderful for doing that. And it's the ways to sign the packages for Android and iOS are part of the release script. Yes?
So you have to have the developer keys in order to push to devices, or you can just do it freely without going through the usual iOS development?
No, you have to have the developer kit. So for iOS development, you have to have the Xcode tools and all of that installed on your computer.
So you can push it to your device?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes, which is why I said the Mac is one of the kind of better platforms to get to do mobile development, because you can target a myriad of devices. You might need a Windows box to do Windows development. Again, I don't know, because no one does Windows development. Okay, so let's see. Okay, that was the last slide. I know I went really fast because it is actually a lot of info to take in 30 minutes. The goal was not for you to now be able to instantly build an app. It's for you to kind of have been exposed to it and to explore the repo, play around with the tools, explore Cordova. It's very approachable. You can, without even having the developer tools, in some cases, you can just play in your browser, right, which is very nice. And I can tell you that making a mobile app it's quite enjoyable when you get to actually play with it on your phone and hold something in your hands. Very different than a desktop web page. You focus on different things. So hopefully this will kind of get you to explore that space. And again, if you have questions, I think I have a few minutes for questions. There are some. And if not, you can always find my email on GitHub or ping me on Twitter. You can ping Toby. He can put you in touch with me. I'm, pretty available. Yes?
Yes, you mentioned an alternative Android emulator.
Yes, Genymotion. Genymotion. What's that? Oh, right there, Genymotion. Hopefully people can see that in the back. That's a very good emulator. It has a free version for free use or some commercial use, but yeah, Android emulation I actually found I just prefer to plug in my Android phone and test on that, because the built-in stock, you can't use the built-in stock one. It is just a piece of garbage. Using phones, and if you are going to do mobile dev, you are going to buy one of each phone you're targeting, and maybe more than one. I have an iPhone sitting at home, I have two Androids. That's just the reality. You have to test on different devices for performance, for consistency, things like that.
Have you tried Grunt and Browserify?
Yes, so Grunt has support. I think they have a Browserify plugin or whatnot. I don't use Grunt for anything. I think it's kind of overkill for a lot of things I do, because most of the things in my makefile Grunt isn't going to have plugins for. They're ad hoc things I made up on the spot to simplify my own workflow. So Grunt would maybe have a plugin solution for one, maybe two of the lines I have in the makefile. The makefile is actually much more versatile because your computer has Bash, and Bash is very powerful. So yeah, if you're already bought into the Grunt workflow and know how to use it well, sure, you can definitely leverage it. There is a Browserify plugin with it, but I just know how to do a makefile. That's the most politically correct way I can answer that question. Yes?
I failed to write down something after you showed us fast click.
Okay.
Yeah, there was.
You wanted that JavaScript file?
There was a gem in there that came after fast click. I can't remember what it was.
Yes. Debug is, I think, the thing. Well, hopefully you'll see.
That's pretty obvious. But.
Okay. As I'm mentioning this, I actually forgot to mention like a really core important part of this because I went so damn fast. There's a package.json file in this repo, okay? I'll get back to answering your question after I mention this. The package.json file actually lists the dependencies. If you're familiar with a system like Bower, with the Bower.json or a component or component.json or any of those useless things, this is the one you want because it has your tools, which only exist on NPM, things like Browserify, NodeMon, Cordova, Ripple Emulator. I'll talk about why I have these here in a second. And then the dependencies, fast click and debug, even though they're mobile JavaScript modules meant to be used in a browser, they're still on NPM. It's cool. You can put web modules on NPM. We've okayed it. I spoke to the creator of NPM himself. It's cool. It's cool. And private is true. That's quite important so you don't accidentally NPM publish your mobile code base. That's very important because NPM will prevent publishing this if you accidentally, for some reason, get drunk at 2 in the morning and decide, oh, it's time to publish my mobile code base to NPM. No, it's not. The reason Cordova is a dev dependency, is because we want to know which version of Cordova we actively started working with and building with, because Cordova is just another piece of code that people write and they break and things change. So if you think that your code will always work against the latest version of Cordova, that's not always true. So it's nice to know, hey, when I started this project, that's kind of the shit I was aiming for, not like Cordova 2.0 or 4.0 or whatever. So that's a good place to also note that. And the makefile references the local Cordova, by the way, right? So it will use the one that's local to the project. Back to your question, before I run out of time. You wanted something from this file?
Yeah,
Well, the project is on GitHub, and I am available, so if you dig through this and have questions, like I said, this was kind of a crude dive into how to use some of these tools to assemble an app. I have been doing this a long time, so it makes sense to me. None of it may make sense to you, but I can help you along with the process and clarify why some of these things are cool and can be used to leverage and make your workflow better. The CoffeeScript speaker will speak in a moment, but you can actually write CoffeeScript and use the CoffeeScript to JavaScript stuff and write your mobile Cordova apps in CoffeeScript as well. Because as long as it ends up in JavaScript at the end of the day on the device, it'll run, right? So you can do that. Other questions?
Use a data store on the phone?
Yes. So with data store, is this when I logged in? I keep doing that. Internet should just be available. I shouldn't have to. Anyhow, you have access to local storage. You have access to session storage. You have access to web SQL, I think, although I don't know, you could be using it. And on the CoreSoft org, I have this module. It's also on NPM called KV, K-A-Y-V. And it's like a simple wrapper to local storage, kind of like Mozilla recently released local storage, I think. It's just a simpler layer for that built in like kind of this require style. When I use any sort of Cordova plugin or anything that's exposed as a global browser API, I typically write a module wrapper around it, right? Even if it's a simple module wrapper, so that when I'm looking at the code later, I can just go, oh yeah, I required this. what does this do? And then the docs for that item, oh, it's a wrapper for local storage with this API. Makes it just kind of easier on maintenance down the line because these browser APIs tend to change as well, and you just want to be isolated from all of those kind of global leakages that tend to happen from the browser namespace.
What is it called again?
The one that I use in my app, KAYV, KV. Yes.
How do you define the routing system, all the URLs and all of the structure of
This is important. You should not change pages on the Cordova app. You can, in my mobile app, I did not. I actually just replaced elements on the pages. So the CoreSoft mobile app, if you want to play with it, is on the Android App Store, not on the iOS App Store yet. It's like waiting for review or whatever the iOS process is. But the way I did the routing on mobile is I just have this, again, module that slides in and out elements of the page and just replaces them. So the URL itself doesn't change because you don't really have a web server backing it. So changing the URL can be a little dangerous on the web view because you're actually opening, what the device does fundamentally is open something like a file link locally. So you know with file links doing back push states and pull states routing can get a little finicky. You need to be careful about
so
that.
it's all a single?
Yeah, basically treat it like a single page app without even the hashtag appending routing stuff in many cases. So if you need to save the current view or state or any of that, you should have modules that persist it to local storage, session storage, things like that. Yeah, I found local storage really, really helpful for storing session data. I actually use it as a cache. Another thing to be very mindful when building a mobile app is every network request hurts. So if you have some sort of API access layer, you should think about building in a cache for that. So I have a timeout cache on top of that KV module, right, for a lot of common data that I need. Last question, and I'm going to pass it off.
Was your whole make file that compressed into the one HTML file, or a JS and HTML?
JS, yes.
Is that sort of a requirement that goes along with this one page idea, or could you have a whole framework in that www folder like Ember, or you could?
You could absolutely use Ember or Angular or something on your mobile side.
Yeah.
The way I do development is very smaller module oriented, whereas I kind of pick the view template layer, the model layer, and I assemble them.
Yeah. But you could have as many images and JS.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, and the repo talks about some of those things. I just kind of had to gloss over a lot of high-level elements. But yeah, absolutely dump images in there. I use custom fonts. I pulled off Google Fonts. I put all those in the app, right? You need to download those assets, put them on the local disk. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's very much like building a web app, and just everything is kind of local. Okay, that's it.